She said that ministers should also end the scandalous practice of children born in Britain being made to pay large fees for citizenship. She pledged to end indefinite detention on immigration grounds and would bar private contractors, including G4S and Serco, from taking on contracts to run immigration centres. And she promised that Labour would introduce a more positive message on immigration. Now, that clearly is a very, very different message to that which actually both parties have been promulgating over the last decade or so. The hostile environment phrase has actually already been changed by the Home Office, so they call it now a compliant environment. Whether the actual policy has changed, I suppose we'll find out soon enough. But this is, again, an issue where I think at the next election, voters are going to have a real choice. And I think that, in general, is a very good thing. Well, what do you make of Diane Abbott's new announcements today? Do you think that, do you welcome the, shall we say, more positive message on immigration that she's proposing? Or do you think, well, hang on a minute, I'm a Labour voter, I voted for Brexit, I voted for Brexit partly because I wanted to take back control of immigration. The signals that Diane Abbott is sending here, it runs completely contrary to that. 0345 6060 973. I suppose, in a sense, the question that we're going to have to ask over the next few years, if this remains Labour's policy and if the Conservatives remain with their policy, who do you trust most on immigration? 0345 6060 973. Well, let's talk to Iain Dale, who's an immigration barrister specialising in asylum, immigration and human rights law. Iain, thank you very much for joining us. Clear blue water or clear red water between the two parties now on immigration, it seems.
Yes, I think what has been said is very, very encouraging. And I think there's actually the wish to enforce. If you want a compliant environment, then you have to also give people the chance to prove it properly. So I think there's one issue of deciding, for example, the kind of people you want to grant entry clearance to. So Diane Abbott on there has said, okay, children, and she doesn't want to impose the minimum income requirement. It's very positive because it has resulted in children growing up as sort of style families, and young children even thinking that the computer screen is their dad, and very, very damaging effects on children. But then the issue should be, do you want to force people out to a hostile environment, which was the Conservative Party policy, or do you want to give people the chance to put their case properly and get help through legal aid, and have proper decisions made and lawful decisions made by the Home Office, and to make those quickly by, for example, reducing the waiting times on Home Office decision-making and the waiting times on waiting for your tribunal hearing to come up. So it's not necessarily inconsistent to say, well, actually, we will have a compliant and humane environment, but we don't need to rely on a hostile environment to force people out themselves because they cannot bear being in a situation where they can't access housing, can't access employment, and can't access healthcare. Because that's really inhumane. But
the minimum income requirement, let's look at that for a second, because that was brought in because presumably there were lots of people who came to the country, couldn't support themselves for whatever reason, and therefore had to access the benefit system. Now, if she abolishes
that's not actually correct.
Well, why was it introduced then?
Well, the standard before was you still had to show maintenance and accommodation. So, but there wasn't. The figure would then have been the benefit rate. So you had to show, as someone, if I wanted to bring over a foreign spouse, I had to show that I earn enough money, so we would be on the same level as being on income support. So the burden was still on me, but there wasn't a figure of 18,600 because a lot of people don't even earn 18,600. But it doesn't make them not.
Well, yes, but it kind of does, doesn't it? Because the average wage in this country is, 28,000 now. I would have thought it was difficult for most people to exist on their own or on less than that. And if you're bringing someone else in as well, that would make it even worse. So I think that the problem that I think Diane Abbott has got here is that everything that she has said today, and I think there are actually some quite interesting ideas in what she said, that she's almost given an open goal to the Conservative Party to, who will want to appear much tougher on immigration than her. She's given them a political open goal.
Well, as I said, I mean, the standard before, which had existed, I think since about 71, was the maintenance and accommodation. So you still had to show that you had a rent, that you could pay rent. But if you were living, for example, in your family home and your spouse was joining, and I have cases such as that, so where there's extended families, there wouldn't have been a figure you would put on rent because it would have been free. And then it would just be an issue of maintenance. So it was always a case-specific assessment, and the people still had to show that their spouses wouldn't rely on public funds. So I think the figure of 18,600, I think it went to a parliamentary committee and they suggested two figures. And as far as I remember, 18,600 was the higher figure. So there will be people who won't be able to meet that, who will nonetheless not rely on public funds. So you could say no reliance on public funds, and that was what the standard was previously, by saying they should maintain and accommodate. And there wasn't an issue with that prior to 2012.
Right. Let's move on to something else. She also wants to close the Yarlswood and Brook House detention centres. Now, I don't know much about Brook House, but certainly Yarlswood has a very bad reputation. If you close those detention centres, and you've still got an immigration policy where you recognise that people who are here illegally will need to be detained in some way. What do you do?
Well, I think that the risk is that the detention is already abused. I mean, there's indefinite detention. There's no limit to detention. So whilst a criminal person knows after that point I will be out, an immigration detainee who has not committed a criminal offence will not actually know.
No, but they are in this country illegally.
Well, they might have ever stayed and then tried to resolve their immigration issues. I had a client who was a victim of torture, and we won his case in the end. But in between, he was detained and nearly committed suicide in Harmondsworth Detention Centre. So we're looking at a huge use of it, and people do get out on bail, etc. So you could say, if you want to stay in touch with the client, and most clients have that incentive because they're trying to resolve the issue. I don't think anyone is actually wanting not to resolve it because it's not very nice to live unlawfully. So you could say they report twice a week. So they're far less intrusive measures than detaining.
That's very naive, surely. Surely in these circumstances, a lot of people will just disappear.
Well, in fact, when and I've done that frequently, you make immigration bail applications. At some point, judges will say, well, we will release the person, and there will be surety. So, for example, there's a family member who says, I pledge £5,000, and if my nephew goes AWOL, so to speak, then I risk losing that money. So I will notify the authorities, and then you have the reporting, etc. So you can put quite strict conditions on someone who's, let's say, at the end stage of the immigration process, which gives them enough incentive to stay in touch with the authorities. And that is being used very, very frequently. And the problem of immigration detention is that people end up there, such as victims of domestic violence, victims of torture, etc., who shouldn't be there and come out much more damaged, but they will come out. So that's just something that, in my view, shouldn't be happening in a country such as this.
OK, Jan, thank you very much. That's Iain Dale, immigration barrister. So how